This is the WGBH Forum Network.
The Creative Method. The National Association of Educational Broadcasters presents Harold Clurman on directing. Here first is Lyman Bryson.
What is the central energy or the source of creativeness in the work of a theater manager, a director of stage plays? Is it the script? Is it the cast? Is it the director himself? Is it the producer? Is it something that the audience or critic can do? Somewhere there is a place out of which the creativeness of a great theater production stems. Bill Cavaness put this question to Mr. Harold Clurman, who answered it in this way.
I think it's the mystery of creation is less mysterious than people would have it be. I think all life is a process of creation. We're always creating. Children create. We create when we make good conversation. We create when we tell a story. We create when we tell a joke. It still happens that certain people have, for reasons unknown to ourselves, talents for creation in one line rather than another. In other words, the kid begins to draw. The other one begins to sing or hum or play, long before he ever thinks consciously of being a creator. In other words, the creative germ is in all people. The only reason we talk of creation in this highfalutin way we've come to talk of it is simply that some people have become professional at it. And that because they've become professional, because famous, they take on an aura, rightly perhaps, an aura of a special distinction. But basically, this is a human thing that's happening, which the whole world shares. And show me a person who has no creative instinct at all, and I'll show you a pretty dead man.
You're listening to Harold Clurman on directing. The Creative Method. The director as creator. One of 10 conversations with creative Americans about the nature of their work. The Creative Method, prepared by WGBH-FM in Boston under a grant from the National Educational Television and Radio Center. Later, we'll tell you how you may obtain excerpts from this and 21 other radio essays on the creative process in American arts, sciences, and professions. But now, Harold Clurman on directing.
Well, the work of a stage director is essentially a collaborative work. To begin with, you have the script itself, which is the initial stimulus. After all, if the play doesn't stimulate you, it's going to be very difficult for you to stimulate it or the actors who are going to interpret it. There is the play itself, which is your initial inspiration. As you study it and read it over and over again, it takes on dimensions beyond the facts of its story and beyond the ordinary line of its plot and the usual thing that any intelligent reader would get from it, but it takes on colors and it takes on particular attributes of particular characterizations, which means people. And then you begin to visualize the kind of people, the kind of voices, the kind of attitudes, the kind of spirit that the people must emanate. And then you choose your casts. The cast, of course, is a group of talented and themselves inspired people, or people capable of being inspired. They are your main collaborators, without their being basically capable of understanding the inspiration which is in the play, or feeling the inspiration which is in the play, and also are capable of taking on from the director some of his excitement about the play, and presumably his understanding of the play. All our efforts would be of little avail. But taking for granted that you have found such a cast, and I'm happy to say that most of the time I have found such casts, the actor is then the instrument, and however, not a passive instrument, it's a creative instrument, an active instrument in this give and take which goes on between the script and the actor, in which, to some extent, the director acts as a kind of physician, midwife, and nurse. It's very difficult to explain explicitly, but I would say, for my part, that I always have a very clear idea what the play should express, what the play should convey in terms not only of thought but of enjoyment on the audience's part, what the author had in mind and what the author wanted the audience to appreciate about his play, and I write them down, these ideas for the play. I write them down as explicitly as I know how, in fact sometimes even philosophically, and at much greater length than I ever cared to articulate verbally to the actors themselves. But I write it down as a guiding line for myself.
It sounds like there's a combination of both the practical approach and something rather mysterious about your creative method.
Yes. Then after this, I've written this down and I meet the actor and the actors begin to read the play. I begin to sense in the actor what they are getting from the play. I do not, at the beginning, try to impose my ideas, but take as much as possible what's creative in the actor to begin with. Then if I see that the actor is on the wrong track or needs a certain guidance or tends to exaggerate one aspect or the other of the play, I guide him. I explain what he's doing that isn't quite what is intended or might falsify the impression that even he himself intends to make. And slowly there begins to be a give and take, a kind of love-making, if you will, between the actor apropos of this thing which they have in common, which they love in common, namely the text of the play. And something is born between this, you might say, a triangular marriage. Something is born which is something always greater than the actor first began with, very often greater than even the director imagined, and sometimes surprising and very often delightfully surprising to the author himself. The creator, professional creator, develops a conscious technique after a certain while. First he creates more or less unconsciously, or not semi-consciously, but a mixture, but as he goes on, he creates more and more consciously. I'm sure I'm much more conscious of my technique as a director than I was when I began directing. But the point is that what I'm working with essentially, and what's good in whatever I do, is not only the technique which I have, but the instinct I always had for the theater. In other words, when I was a kid of 6 years old, my father took me to the theater. I think it was to see Merchant of Venice or some classic play of that kind. I immediately fell in love with the theater even before I understood what the words meant and the significance of Shakespeare and so forth. I just loved the atmosphere. I loved the make-believe. I loved the color. I loved the romance of it. And I never stopped going to theater after that. I didn't think at that time necessarily I would become a member, part of the theatrical profession. I was very interested in reading too. I was interested in all the arts. I always went to concerts. I always went to picture galleries. But I had a real appetite for the theater, like there are kids who have appetite for baseball or whatever. And when I began to get into the theater, I began to realize that I probably would be a director because I had a good background of literary understanding of the history of the theater, because I found certainly at a certain time that I had a great aptitude, or at least a desire, to teach, and that all of these things slowly made me realize that I would end up probably by being a director. But I didn't start by being a director because it's very hard to do so. I started by being an actor and also a stage manager. And my feeling was not necessarily I was a great actor, or that I would become a great actor, or that I wished to become a great actor. My feeling was that this was a way of entering the theater in a practical way, in a way which would put me in touch with all the aspects of the theater that I was unfamiliar with.
Do you feel that your experience as an actor has made you gain as a director, has added to your ability as a director?
It was greatly helpful, and always is very helpful for a director to have acted at some time or other, or tried to act at some time or other of his career.
Is this just from the standpoint of understanding the actor's problems? Or?
That is, first of all, you learn a great deal of humility. You find out that it's not as easy to do what's explained to you as to actually and to carry out. In other words, the man who explains to another person how a thing should be done feels very lofty about his explanation, and if he thinks he's lucid, he doesn't understand why a thing can't be performed. This is a great delusion that some directors who have never been actors have. But if he's been an actor, he realizes that creating in a pleasurable way for an audience what the person understands is not as so simple a process. So if nothing else, the acting teaches the director something of the humility toward the instrument, the very delicate instrument, the human being who is the actor.
Well, speaking of this kind of humility, I'm sure there's another source of it, too. You've directed roughly 40 plays, and I think you'd probably be considered superhuman if they had all been smash hits. What effect does the relative failure of a play have on you as a director?
I find that at the beginning, failure of a play was a discouraging phenomenon to me, not as a director, but just as a human being. It takes away your energy and it takes away your enthusiasm to some slight extent. But as I grew more experienced, I find that failure or success has nothing to do with my direction whatsoever. That I have directed just as well and sometimes better plays that have failed as the plays I have succeeded. It's true that I'm always praised for the plays in which I've succeeded, but that has nothing to do with my own estimation of my direction. I have directed plays extremely well, I thought, which have failed, and sometimes directed plays less well, which have succeeded. Well, now, the difference has to do with the nature of the text and sometimes with the cast. But only a person acutely aware of the technique of the theater will know why one play fails despite good direction while another succeeds.
Well, aren't there all sorts of outside influences that could be brought into this, too?
Generally, what succeeds is generally a good play. That is to say, a play that basically has some vital point of interest for an audience which has been, let's say, at least moderately well performed. And a play which, for some reason, throws the audience off, discourages them in a way that they do not wish to be discouraged, or shocks them in their moral conceptions in a way that they find reprehensible. That play, no matter how well done, will not succeed with a mass audience. And I have a number of instances in my career of plays which I thought were very well directed, which were not successful. But it wasn't the director's fault. I will say, in a certain sense, it wasn't the author's fault or anybody's fault, but the sheer fact that at that particular time the audience couldn't accept a point of view.
Well, of course, these are the things that are noticeable. The success or the failure of a play is what gets into the papers, the things that we really know about.
But I'm not talking from the standpoint of the people who count the profits and losses at the moment. I'm talking as the creator and his creative method. And it's a somewhat different problem, although that totally disjoined. They are related, but they are not exactly the same. And my great point always is to make people aware that the two ideas are not identical. The idea of creation and the idea of success are not identical thoughts and ideas.
Does the environment, the society that you grow up in, have a great deal to do with your choice of a field that you follow, a creative field?
I would say that the society that you grow up in always influences you as an artist in the kind of thinking you do and the kind of aptitudes you have, not in general, but specifically how you use those aptitudes. The kind of environment, education, all do play a part, no doubt, in forming you. It doesn't make your talent, but it tells the talent, or so to speak, directs the talent into particular channels.
Do you think that there's any kind of identifying sort of personality trait or character trait amongst the professional creators or the high-level creators that makes them identifiable, that sets them apart?
I would say in terms of directors, not in terms of all artists, because I know a great many artists. Some of my closest friends, Aaron Copland, for example, is my oldest and closest friend. But among directors, I would say the outstanding trait is that they have the capacity to interest a group of actors. Because the actors in a production are to the director what the play is to the audience. In other words, the director must be a good actor for his actors. That doesn't mean a good actor in the sense of a performer, but by his quiet or by his noise, by his stringency or by his sweetness, by his patience or by his bad temper, somehow or other he must arrest the actors and command their respect and make them feel creative. When he has that, and all of the different directors, no matter how variable their personality, have something of that, then they become good actors to begin with the actors. And that's where direction begins with, the actors. Then it reaches the audience at a later stage.
Could we take a specific play, any one of these that you've directed, as an example of this approach to the actors, and talk for a little while about your own method of directing, your own techniques of directing?
Well, I've directed so many people that it's hard for me to isolate any one a particular instance, I would say. But let me begin with a play that wasn't... it's with Carl Malden. I'll mention the actor because he's a well-known actor, and because he was playing in Desire on the Elms by O'Neill. And Carl Malden is rather a soft man, a mild man, a good-natured man. And in this play, he had to play Ephraim Cabot, who is hard, rock-hard, old New England. He always speaks about how God is hard. And he'd had to struggle with the stones of New England in 1850 and build his farm with great difficulty. And this man was a soft man, Carl Malden. And there was no way, except by doing violence to his voice and his whole total personality, to make him hard. And there was no use just explaining to him that the character was hard, because he understood that from the lines as well as anybody could. And the problem then became, how do you make a soft man hard, you see, without his feeling that he's doing anything that's false and denaturing it to him? And I thought about a long time, because there was no use saying, please, you're too soft, because that's just repeating what he already knows and just tends to render the actor impotent by asking him to do what he can't. And finally I said, have you ever had a grudge against anybody? Have you ever felt mean and harsh toward a fellow actor, let's say, who was getting all the notices? You played with Marlon Brando, for example, A Streetcar Named Desire, and you were brilliant, but he was the star. Didn't you ever feel any time a sense of rivalry, he says, oh, I think I know what you're talking about. And slowly I said, this man has a grudge. It isn't a grudge actually, but it's the kind of resistance which makes a man tough. And this man is fighting the resistant soil, the resistant rocks of New England. And God is hard because God, in a certain sense, is a rival who's challenging him. So he's defying God. And his neighbors who say to him, you'll never make it, and who dislike him, who laugh at him, they are also people whom he has a grudge against, in the sense that he has to prove them wrong. And slowly, as I spoke of this, and he understands these things in a purely human, universal sense, the hardness came to him without his ever thinking of his being hard, and he is a new man. And that is what I call a creative process for the director as well as for the actor.
Well, you were giving him the inspiration then, not to do something from the intellectual standpoint, but to develop his own emotional set.
Yeah, but the problem is always to try to give something the actor can feel spontaneously, which in the confines of the 2 hours makes him into a new man. And this new man is both himself and something he isn't ordinarily, but which he contains at moments, and which the play isolates through the medium of the play's text and the medium of the director's inspiration and guidance.
This then would be a sort of a general technique that would vary with each actor.
That is true. I've often said that one of the differences between a conductor and a director is this, that when a director or conductor tells a violin to play a certain note in a certain rhythm, or he knows the kind of sound a violin may make, a trombone may make, or a piano may make. But the actor is a different thing, and you have to know whether to scratch him, thump him, or caress him.
What would your advice be for a student of the theater, a person who has a certain amount of theatrical background already in his own environment, who has a strong desire to become a director?
I would tell him to get a job in the theater, in whatever capacity he is able to. The capacity most directors have have essayed, or rather have tried to become the stage manager. They become stage managers. I was a stage manager. Sometimes they're generally assistants before they're stage managers. Kazan was a stage manager for me. He was my first stage manager. He'd also been an actor. Acting is very useful. Stage managing is very useful.
Why is stage managing so particularly important?
Because the stage manager constantly has to listen to the actors, constantly has to listen to the director, constantly has to listen to the stage hands, constantly has to listen and conduct the arrangement of lights. So in a certain way, he's constantly in touch with every department of the theater.
The scene designer and the light
everything.
designer.
He's supposed to follow everything. In other words, the way to become a director is not to try to become a director, but to undertake some function in the theater which puts you into a responsible job which you have to fulfill, which keeps you attuned to whatever is going on. Acting and stage managing are the two best ways.
You have to really absorb theater almost by osmosis. And
by being present with the functioning of the whole machinery of theater and observing all of it.
And then, are there specific techniques that you add on to this general awareness of theater?
Yes, you begin to watch, first of all, how directors work, and you begin to see certain patterns which they follow. Then you adapt those techniques to your own capacities and abilities. For example, I used to watch a director for some time before I started directing, who was able to almost improvise his direction as he watched actors. But I found that was a technique that was utterly unsuited to my own temperament, which had to work things out not in terms of movement, but in terms of thoughts and ideas before I began working. So I did something he never did. I wrote out practically little books about the play and how it's going to be directed, and lines specifying almost how every scene should be played and almost every line should be read for myself, which I didn't read back to the actor, but I myself had to be clear. Now, that doesn't necessarily follow that every director does do it. Now, I have given courses in direction, but I tell my students when I have such that although they needn't write these things down as specifically as I do, nor needn't think that it's necessary to write them down or be as articulate as I try to be for myself, the very fact that I do it means that some such thing is going on in every director, whether it's through spontaneous combustion or whether it's through actual plan. But the important point is that this basic structural thinking about a play, which I do consciously through writing, must in some way or other be present in all direction, and therefore is, in a way, a kind of universal technique.
How about actual formal education? How about do you feel that taking a degree in any one of the schools that offer degrees in directing, for example, will give an advantage?
Degrees and education are not synonymous in my mind. Education is absolutely essential. Where you get it, that's a matter of accident, choice, and circumstance. But I believe you can't know enough to be a director.
But do you think you can get this kind of education in a formal situation, in a school?
You can get it wherever you can get it. I've learned things from schools which are not necessarily theater schools. I also studied and watched Mr. Richard Boleslavsky at a school called the American Laboratory Theater. It no longer exists, and Mr. Boleslavsky is dead. I also watched and listened to Jacques Capot, the French director, who trained Dulin, Jouvet, and Batty, and also indirectly Jean-Louis Barrault. I studied wherever I could and wherever I can, through teachers and through friends and through my actors and through the stagehands as when necessary. There isn't anybody high or low for whom isn't constantly educating me.
Can we sum up then as a final statement and give you the opportunity to restate your creed in the business of gaining experience in order to become a director?
You have to immerse yourself in the theater. That's my basic creed. Immerse yourself in all aspects of the theater as much as possible. Be present at rehearsals when you're desired and undesired. Be present at conferences. Read up. Yes, read up. Listen to the good directors who have something to say, lectures, and listen to many of them. study scene design, talk to scene designers, question, read criticism, fight with the critics, but in every way, just immerse yourself in the whole thing, which is the theater, and see a lot of plays.
Harold Clurman on directing. And here again is our host and commentator for the Creative Method, Lyman Bryson.
Mr. Clurman ended the conversation with advice to the young which I think you'll find duplicated in what a good many other creative people have to say to those who are ambitious to enter into the arts. You can't know too much to be a good theater director. In fact, you can't know too much about anything to be a good member of the theater team, this collaboration. And in talking about what the young could do, go to the theater, learn all they can, study and work, Mr. Clurman is indicating the answer, or referring back perhaps to his answer to our original question, and that is, where is the source of creativeness? Is it in the script, the director, the actors, or where? By saying that it's in everybody. It's in a collaboration, a harmonious collaboration of all the people involved, all the things involved, with the director acting as the leader. As a leader, a director of a stage play has certain handicaps, perhaps their advantages at the same time, which someone like the director of an orchestra, for instance, doesn't have. When somebody who's directing an orchestra calls for a strain from the violins, he has a pretty good idea what a violin is going to give out. When the director of a stage play says to a gifted and imaginative actor, well, play it this way, he doesn't know how much the actor is going to contribute out of his own personality. And this, of course, is only illustrative of the extraordinary complication which a good stage director can bring into a common and effective collaboration, as I said. Mr. Clurman said that all life is creation. Children are creative. And this is again a reassurance to the young at the same time that it puts a heavy burden of responsibility upon them. All people are creative in some degree. And if you are going to take part in something like the theater, one of the greatest and the oldest of the arts, you must not only feel your own inspiration, your own gifts with confidence, you must believe in yourself, but you must also believe in this medium through which you are going to express yourself. Be worthy of it. Work hard enough to do what a good director expects you to do. Then you play a part in this collaboration, which in the long run makes the creative theater a reality. In view of these opinions of Mr. Clurman, you will, I'm sure, be specially interested in what is going to be said next week on this series by Mr. Lee Strasberg, who will talk about acting as part of the theater collaboration and the background of his long experience as a director and a producer, to be sure, but more especially as a teacher of acting.
Thank you, Dr. Bryson. You've heard Harold Clurman, the director, as creator. One of 10 conversations furthering our understanding of creativeness in American arts and professions. The Creative Method is recorded by WGBH FM in Boston under a grant from the National Educational Television and Radio Center. Producer Jack D. Summerfield, with Laurelyn Thatcher and Bill Cavness as production associates. Next week, Lee Strasberg, the actor, as creator. And 2 weeks from today, Jory Kepish on design. The Creative Method is distributed by the National Association of Educational Broadcasters.
This is the National Educational Radio Network.